Hello and welcome back once again to Organic Cardboard. My name is Owen Kneep, and today I am all set with some beer and some bread so that I can properly talk to you about the game Beer and Bread. Beer and Bread is a game that was designed by Scott Almes. Now, if you don't know who Scott Almes is, he's a very well-known game designer. He did the entire Tiny Epic series, as well as Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, and Beer and Bread is neither tiny nor epic, but it is another great game that he has decided to make. This also has some really nice artwork by Michael Menzel, and it's kind of reminiscent of like viticulture or Stone Age, and maybe even a little bit towards the lines of Uwe Rosenberg and that kind of pastoral farm kind of style. But in Beer and Bread, what you are doing, if you can't guess, is you are competing to create the most beer and bread to sell for orders that become points at the end of the game. The main shtick for the scoring, though, of this game is that you can only score the lower of the two values. So as you're producing them, you're going to be producing both the beer and the bread independently. They're going to have point values associated with each one, and whichever is the lowest is what your actual score is of the game. So you're going to have to kind of figure out how to produce both of them fairly evenly throughout the game. So the mechanics in Beer and Bread are going to deal with an interesting take on card drafting as well as resource management, and it has some really interesting ways that you're going to be dealing with quite a bit of player interaction in the game. So with Beer and Bread, you've got 6 rounds that you're dealing with. Each of these rounds are going to alternate between these dry and fruitful years. You are sharing a board, and the board is basically of 2 villages, or one village that's split by a river. One side has a brewery and a bakery, and the other side happens to also have a brewery and a bakery that are competing with one another, but otherwise you're sharing a common agricultural farm setup, so all of your resources come from the same fields that are going to include your hops and your barley and your wheat and your rye that you can collect, as well as the water from the river itself. So all of these are limited, even though I wouldn't think that you would ever run out of water in the game. There's so much water in it, but the other ones, you'll certainly find times where you are competing directly for those resources. So each round you are dealing with this fruitful year and a dry year. Well, those are 2 separate rounds, but they alternate. So you go from the fruitful years to the dry years, fruitful, dry, fruitful, dry. So you've got 3 of each. And they're going to play out differently with the way that your cards are collected, the way that you deal with drafting and things like that. Now, each round you're going to deal with 5 cards in your hand. And from those 5 cards and the fruitful years, you are going to play 1 card down, and then the other person's going to play a card down. You know, whoever goes first. There is a first-person tracker that changes hands at the end of each round, depending on who has the least amount of resources. But the first player is going to play their card down, and then the second player will play theirs, and then you'll actually swap your hands. So in that sense, you're going to be drafting 1 card and playing that card one at a time, and swapping hands throughout the entirety of the round of a fruitful year. On each one of your cards, you're going to have 3 things that you can do. So you can use your card to harvest with, you can use it to produce a type of beer or a type of bread if it's a bread card, or you've got an upgrade action that you can do on the bottom of it as well. So each one of these cards has harvest icons at the top. When you play your harvest icon down, then the card for a harvest, you'll take those resources off the board. You'll place them. You've got a warehouse that can hold 9 of these items. And you do have ways to upgrade that to hold more as the game goes. But at the beginning, you've only got 9, so you're limited. And then on another turn, if you play a second card down for a harvest action, then they'll stack on each other and they'll repeat the previous cards that were played. So with like this one right here, you would get a hops and a water. And then if you play this one down on another turn, not only will you get the water, the rye, and the wheat, but you'll also get that hops and that water additionally as well. So you get 5 resources off of that play. However, if you overdo it and you don't have the room in your warehouse, then you have to choose what resources you're going to keep. And then all of those other resources, even if you didn't really want to harvest them, you have to harvest them off the field. Then you have to give the other player the option to take those if they have room. If they don't have room, then you just skip that part of it. But if they have room, then they can choose from the additional ones. So you have to be kind of careful about how many of these harvests that you do. Now, the reason why I'm going through a big explanation about that harvesting is that is one of the biggest differences in the fruitful and the dry years. So in the fruitful years, when you're playing these harvest actions down, these cards just stay put. You could play the other cards for other things like upgrades and maybe producing a beer or bread. But otherwise, those cards are the only ones that are just staying out in front of you. And when you go to the dry year, what will happen is instead of you swapping cards back and forth, you'll pick up all those harvest cards that you've set down, and then you'll draw up to your hand limit of 5. And during those dry years, you are no longer swapping hands back and forth. So it is a way for you to plan for cards in future rounds. As when you're playing these harvest cards down, you'll know that you're going to have them back in hand. So it goes really well with that theme that you're dealing with, both a fruitful year and then a dry year, because that fruitful year, it's easier for you to get the resources that you need. And then the dry year, it's going to be harder. So you want to have those, you want to have your stocks full in that fruitful year. Because one of the other things that changes when you go from a fruitful year to a dry year is that the resources that are available in the fields are much lowered too. So they become really tight and they become contested. And you'll find that you're wanting to produce something and the other player just happens to play a harvest down right before you were going to do it yourself, and they take those resources that you need. And so you really want to be prepared in those fruitful years. So again, fruitful years, you're essentially drafting one card at a time and playing it back and forth until you played all your 5 cards down. Then in the dry years, you're getting those cards back up to 5 cards, and you get 3 option cards that come out on your board that you can swap your cards out for as you play a turn, but you have to immediately play that card that you swapped out that you swapped from your hand out onto the board. When you're doing that, that's like one of the only other interactions besides competing with those resources, those limited resources on the dry years, is that you're maybe competing for those optional cards that are set out, that are drawn off the deck. But at any length, you're dealing with a lot of interaction in the fruitful years, maybe a little less in the dry years, other than that competition. And the entirety of the game is that you're constantly trying to produce as much beer and bread as possible, as evenly as possible. You've only got room on your player area for one of those cards to be produced at a time. So your bakery will get filled with the bread that you produced, and then the brewery will get filled with the beer that you produced, or it'll be dirty at least. So that's the way they list it as. That's dirty from the last production. So when you play a card down for an upgrade card, not only are you getting whatever that special ability is that continues for the rest of the game, that upgrade will stay on your board for the rest of the game, but then you're clearing off that board to give you more space to be able to produce more beer and bread. So you're having to time when you're taking your actions, you're having to plan ahead and try to make those movements as efficient as possible, so that ideally you're going to produce a beer, you're going to produce a bread, and then you're going to do an upgrade and clear those off, and then do harvests and things like that in a way that's going to maximize your turns and be able to get you the most beer and the most bread that you can. You're doing that back and forth, and then at the end of the game, that last like round that you've got, maybe the last 2 or 3 turns, can end up being a little bit. Well, if you plan just right, you might be able to get those turns to work out well for you, but they can be a little wasted, or some of the upgrades that you have will give you points at the end of the game, so you might just play upgrade cards or hang on to them for that last round. That last round is a dry year, so you're not passing cards back and forth, so you at least have a little more control over your actions. But yeah, that last one's a little. It can feel a little dry, a little extra dry, if you're not able to make those turns work well for you. But overall, I found that the game was really enjoyable. I rate this game at a 7 out of 10. I think it's a really solid game. I'll probably always want to bring this around or have it as an option to play in between other games. It's pretty quick. So the first game I played, it probably took us a good maybe an hour and a half to play, and that was only because I was learning the rules, I was learning the mechanics, and I was trying to figure out how you choose what you're trying to do, your strategy and how you're going to plan ahead. But the second game, once we knew how it was played, it played a whole lot faster. So I definitely think that you can get down to that 30, 45 minute suggested play time pretty quickly. I don't think that's too unreasonable. So it's a great game to bring out if you've got a board game meetup that you might be going to, where people are playing multiple games. You might be waiting for someone to finish a game, and you want to pull out something that is fun and interesting and doesn't last too long. I really like games that deal with resource management like this. Drafting is fun. It's not like my favorite thing in the world, but it's fun with the amount of interaction that you have. I think this game is like a lot of 2-player games, but especially in this one, there's a lot of interesting player interaction. You can't plan your turns really well. You'll try to, and you have to. You need to make some plans, especially for you're getting ready for those dry years. But you have to turn around and change pretty quickly whenever the opponent does something that just screws up your whole plan. Like last game I had this big 9-point bread card, which I think was maybe the highest to go. I was all ready to do it. I just needed one more harvest, and yet I wasn't even thinking about the fact that my opponent was gonna possibly play a harvest card down, and that's what she did, and took the one thing that I needed. So I had to completely change the type of bread or beer that I was making at the time, and that can really mess you up if your whole warehouse is already full. So you can see some interesting ways that these player interactions will happen. But all in all, I think it's really well done. It's a fairly small box, so it's easy to bring. It doesn't take up a huge amount of space. Definitely not as much as some of those tiny Epic games do. But you need a decent table. You can't be sitting at just a teeny tiny little corner. You need at least a square table to sit around to play it on, because that board kind of folds out. It's not crazy long, but it's let me pull it out here real quick. Needs a little bit of space. So about that long, and it all folds up really well. The insert is perfectly adequate for the game. I thought that was pretty well done for what it was. Now, I always sleeve my cards if I can. This game came with a single section for cards that would have fit them all if they weren't sleeved. But I was able to kind of smash that cardboard down and fold it out, and it worked pretty well to be able to fit these 2 stacks of these cards pretty evenly down into it. And so we had a pretty decent amount of space once that's all done. These resources work pretty well to just jumble them all in there, and it fits in pretty nicely. It's not too big of a deal. They all hold in pretty well too. You don't have to worry about them shifting like crazy. There's a board your board's going to sit on top of it, and everything holds fairly well. If you jumble this around a lot, you might knock it loose, but overall it's fairly tight. So again, Beer and Bread, 7 out of 10. I think it's a solid game. I think it's going to be something that you're going to want to just play constantly over and over and over again, but definitely worthwhile to have if you like drafting mechanics, if you like that interesting style on drafting, if you like resource management, and especially if you like a lot of direct player interaction like that. I think you're going to really like Beer and Bread. So check it out, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So, anyways, if you enjoy this video, you can always give a couple of those free clicks on the screen. It really helps out channels like mine. But at any length, I'm always just so thankful that you guys stopped by today, and I hope that you guys are just having a great time, enjoying your games. Anyway, at any length, until next time, take care. I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.